Hey, uh, I don't see any number of people here, so I'm saying hi, but I'm not. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me know you're here by putting a comment. Can we remove that comment, Mark, that somehow Facebook always puts up that you can support the page by sending stars? I, I, we don't use the star. I don't know what the stars are. We don't use them. Hi, Lisa. Okay, it's good to see people. Hi. Thanks for joining. Um, so hi Jeanette. Ah, yay. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit about hi Lonnie. Good to see you. I am gonna talk a little bit about this series, what this series is, why I'm doing it. And then we're gonna do a Hanuman Chalisa because I'm in that mood. I did a Hanuman Chalisa earlier because there's the 24-hour Hanuman Chalisas going on simultaneously, and I did one earlier for it, and so it put me in the Hanuman Chalisa mood. And it's Hanuman Jayanti coming up on Tuesday, so it's where I'm at, where I'm feeling it. Hi, Paul. But this series, Conversations on Practice, the reason that I wanted to do this is because I felt like I was seeing a lot of, hi Sanjay, I felt like I was seeing a lot of misinformation online, especially during the pandemic. It seemed to multiply. And there was just a lot of, hi John, a lot of talk online and going around in our sort of practice circles in the yoga world, chant world, that hi Will, Jai Hanuman, that I felt like I wanted to do some talks with practitioners who I know well or who I respect about what practice really is on the ground, different aspects of it, how it lives in us daily, how our practice relates to our work, our work in the world, our lives on a daily basis, and take away a lot of that magical thinking that kind of I saw sprouting up, or fake mysticism that I've seen over the years a lot of. And so I just wanted to bring it really into that space of honesty. Like, we're all practicing. Hi, Avram. And we are living in the world and doing our work and trying to do good work in the world. And how does that all relate to each other? So, Uma Didi, hi. So before we start talking to Brooke, and before I introduce Brooke, we'll do Hanuman Chalisa together. And I'll introduce Brooke, and we'll start and I'll talk about the topic tonight. All right. So you guys sing along wherever you are. And also, you guys have to tell me if the sound is not right. Like, I'm going to look up at the comments, but, tell me right away. Like, hey, you sound like crap, lady. Stop it. Okay. Mangalamurati Marutanadan Sakala Mangalamulani Kandan Mangalamurati Marutanandan Sakala Mangalamulani Kandan Shri Guru Charana Sarojaraja Nijman Mukuru Sudari Marana Raghuvara Bimala Jasu Jodaya Kupalachari Buddhihina Tanu Janike Sumiram Pavana Kumara Bala Buddhi Vidya Deumai Harakalesha Vikarasya Varamachandra Padaje Sharanam Jaya Hanuman Jnana Guna Sagar Jaya Kapishati Uloka Ujaga Ramaduta Tulita Baladama Anjani Putra Pawana Sutanama Mahabira Vikrama Vajarangi Kumati Nivara Kumati Kesangi Kanchana Parana Viraja Subesa Kanana Kundala Kunchita Kesa Hatam Vajra Vart Vajabiraje Kande Munjane Usaje Shankara Suvana Kesari Nanda Teja Pratapa Mahajagavandan Vidyavana Guniya Chichacha Ramakaja Karibeko Acha Prabhu Charitra Suni Beko Rasiya Ramalakana Sita Manabasiya Sukshamarupadari Siya Indikava Vikatarupadari Lanka Charava Bhimarupadari Asura Sanhare Ramachandra Ke Kaja Sanvare Lasa Jivana Lakana Jiyai Shri Raghubira Harashi Uralai Raghupati Kini Pahuta Barai Tuma Mama Priya Bharatai Samabai Sasambadana Tumaro Jasakave Asakai Shri Pati Kantalakave Sanakadika Brahmadi Munisa Narada Sharada Sahita Isa Yamakubera Digapala Jante Kavi Kobidakai Sakai Kahante Tuma Upakara Sugriva Hikina Rama Milaya Raja Paradina Tumaro Mantra Vibhishanamana Lankeshwara Vaisava Jagajana Yuga Sahasranjo Jana Parabhanu Vilyotahi Madhura Palachanu Prabhu Madrika Malimukamai Jalari Langi Gaya Charajanai Durga Makaja Jagatake Jete Sugamanugraha Tumare Tete Rama Duare Tumarakavare Hotanagya Binu Pesare Sabasukala Hei Tumari Sharana Tumarakshaka Kavu Kodarana Apanate Jasamaro Ape Tina Uloka Hankatenkampe Buddha Pishachani Katanayave Mahabira Jabanama Sanave Nasero Gare Sabapira Japatani Rantara Hanumatabira Sangata Se Hanumana Churave Manakrama Bachana Dhyana Jolave Sabapararama Tapasvi Raja Dinake Kaja Sakala Tumasaja Ora Manora Chijoko Ilave So Yamita Jivana Palapave Charan Yuga Paratapa Tumara He Parasita Jagata Ujiyara Sadhu Santa Ketu Marakovare Asurani Kandana Rama Dulare Ashta Siddhina Medike Data Sabaradina Janaki Mata Rama Rasayana Tumare Pasa Sadara Raghupati Kedasa Tumare Bhajana Rama Jikopave Janma Janama Ke Dukkha Bisarave Antakala Raghubara Purajai Jajanna Hari Bhaktakai Orte Vita Chetana Tarai Hanumata Say Service Sukakarai Sangatukate Mite Sabapira Jasunire Hanumata Palabira Jai 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 Hanumana Gosai Puripakaro Gurudeva Kinai Josita Parapata Karakoi Jutaimani Masukoi Joya Mare Hanumana Chalisa Koi Siddhi Saki Garisa Josida Sasadari Chera Ki Jenatari Daya Madera Pavanatanaya Sankataharana Mangala Murati Rupa Ramalakana Sita Sahita Hridaya Basau Surabhupasya Ramachandra Padaje Sharanam Mangalamurati Marutananda Sakala Mangalamulani Kandan Mangalamurati Marutananda Sakala Mangalamulani Kandan Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram 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 Sitaram 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 Shri 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 Namkali Baba Maharaj Ki Jai Shri 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 Siddhi Mata Ji Ki Jai Shri 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 Bajrang Bali Hanumana Ki Jai Shri 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 Ma Maharaj Ki Jai. Okay. So before I bring Brooke on, I just want to say that talk a little bit about the topic tonight. And I did see Kamania, if you're still there, I saw you had a question, and we will do question and answer at the end. So hopefully you'll stick around and I'll answer your question then, because it's a good question. But I want to make sure we have time to talk to Brooke. So the topic tonight, as many of you might already know, is about depression and loneliness, and how that can, how your practice can relate to that, right? How spiritual practice can support it, and also how there are times when that's not the support that you need. And I wanted to talk about both of these things because there's still a lot of shame around it. And people, I think, often feel like if they're practicing, if they're on the path and they've started a spiritual practice and maybe they had depression before, but now they're feeling better and it comes back, that they're not doing it right. There's something wrong. It's them. They're not good practitioners. They're not good devotees. And that's just not true, right? Like you can be a longtime practitioner, as I am and as Brooke is, and you can suffer from depression, and that's just part of the human experience, right? And it's not your fault. And it's not because you're not practicing, well, and it's not because you're not really devoted, right? So that's the sort of big umbrella for tonight. And then I want to introduce Brooke, who is my longtime friend and guru sister. She's a yoga teacher and has been teaching yoga since 1998. studying primarily with Diane Long in the tradition of Vanda Scarvelli. So, and she's also, been, a devotee of Siddhima and Neem Karoli Baba, and we've been in India together and had so many life experiences. And actually, we've talked a lot about depression over the years and about difficulties, and we have shared a lot. And so, Brooke, I asked her to come on and talk about it because she's a super articulate and honest person. And I love the way I've loved our conversations over the years. They've been a great support to me. And so that's why I'm having the conversation with her. And maybe we'll have more of these kinds of conversations with other people. But for now, it's Brooke tonight. And I'm super happy for you guys all to meet her. So, Mark, let's bring on Brooke. Oh, hey.
Hi. Thank you,
Nice.
Ambika.
Lovely to see you here.
Yes.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a nice introduction. And I want to thank you for doing these because I think they're good and they're important and they're different. So thank you.
Well, thanks for doing this. It's not an easy thing to do publicly, I think. And I appreciate that, you've got the courage.
Turn that on.
And I actually want to just start with you telling people your story. I want people to get, who don't know you in our community, if you could just talk about how you started practicing yoga, when you started teaching, and how you came to Neem Karoli Baba, how Neem Karoli Baba came to you, and Siddhima, like if you could give us some of that background of how, because you've been practicing since the 90s, like me.
Yeah. So, okay. So to start, I hope that this to make some order of this. So when I was a child, I had some very hippie at the time parents. I was born in the mid 70s. And one of the deepest memories that I have as a child, not just auditory memories, but like kind of body feel memories, is my father singing the Hare Krishna mantra to me. And he used to sing Rama, Rama, Rama to me as a child, like infant, small little person, walking me to sleep at night. And so this was what was put into me as a little person. And then eventually, like, my parents split up and life goes on. And so we can fast forward about 20 plus years. And I end up, what was I doing? I had been in nightclubs, in corsets, on drugs, doing the dark, creepy thing. And
I love that about you.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you.
I love that part of you.
So I did, that was kind of my whole thing. And I was bartending and working in restaurants because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I got to the point where I couldn't walk. So now we're looking like I was working so much that on my day off, I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain. And so I used to sit up late at night, chain smoking cigarettes until the sun would come up, and I would watch Tybo commercials and Billy Blanks and, his kickboxing videos. And I thought, oh, maybe I should get some kickboxing videos. Like, I wanted to exercise. I felt out of shape. I was probably my mid-early 20s at that point. And it was also, because maybe it was like 1998, right? So Madonna's Ray of Light CD was out, right? Madonna was all about doing her yoga. And so my mom calls me the next
for
morning.
a while.
Right.
Sorry.
And so my mom called me the next morning after, me being up till 7:30 in the morning, smoking cigarettes, watching Tybo commercials and infomercials. And she said, at the time she was cleaning houses, and she said, this guy owes me money for cleaning his house. Maybe you can exchange yoga lessons with him. And I knew nothing about yoga. And I just knew, well, Madonna does yoga. Madonna's cut and in good shape. So I should do yoga. So it was pure vanity that led me to this place. So I took a yoga class and I loved it. And by the third yoga class I took, they were offering a 50-hour teacher training. Woo, one of the first of its kind. And for those of you who don't know, so I live just outside of Philadelphia. So this was like early on, and there was no such thing as Yoga Alliance or anything like that. So I signed up, and everything in my body was like, "Oh, you're going to do that training," not knowing anything about anything. I signed up, I did the training, and I felt like I was about to like kind of walk through a doorway. So I was doing the training at the time. It was Yoga on Main and David Newman, who now does a lot of kirtan and stuff. So he was my first. He was the teacher for that training, and it was his studio. And
Right, that's where I met you.
yeah, yeah. So we started there, and it was just, it's like I kind of jumped in with both feet, and you know, it did what I would take a yoga class, and then I would come do it for an hour and a half practice at the studio, and I would come home and I would do the whole practice again at home in my apartment, in my bedroom in the dark with cats crawling on me and stuff like that. And I was just, there was something about it that was just like this addiction. And I have a very obsessive streak in me. So once I get my claws into something, I just don't let it go until I'm thoroughly done. So, like, I just kind of took off with the yoga. And while I was there, David's sister-in-law had painted a painting of Maharaji.
Oh,
That
I
was actually,
remember that
I wish I
painting.
had it. Like, I don't have it. I don't think
I
I have
have
it
it
here in my
somewhere.
room with me. Yeah, I know I have it. I know exactly where I have it. Maybe I'll, if we
Have to
had a
unearth
break.
it. It's
Anyway, it was just,
beautiful, people. It's a
huge. It's
beautiful
a
painting.
beautiful painting, and
Mm.
it's just colorful and has gold leaf on it, and it's gigantic. It's got to be like, kind of 4 or 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, and it's just this big painting of Maharaji. And so David was getting into chanting, and specifically like kind of devotional Hindu chanting, and like we were all on the ride together. And I didn't know anything about anything. All I knew was that I liked this, and these were my friends, and we're hanging out. And so this painting showed up, and everybody was so googly eyed about this painting. And they were like, "Oh, and this painting of Maharaji and Ram Dass and blah, 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 blah." And I kind of looked at it, and I was like, they're my friends now, and I like hanging out with them, and it's a good time. But I didn't get the thing. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't understand it. And but I just liked how it felt being around these folks and having, practicing yoga and studying yoga. And eventually I began to teach yoga. So 6 months after my first yoga class, I was teaching. So everything happened very quickly for me, because 50 hours seemed to be enough for certify you as a teacher back then. So anyway, so the painting came into play, and then so we'd get together and do kirtan at David's apartment. And I was so skeptical of this whole thing. I was so skeptical of like, why are people giving themselves to this in this way? I didn't know anything about it. I didn't grow up in any kind, I was such a like a kind of a pagan baby of sorts. Like like there was no organized religion around me. I was exposed to so much and so many different spiritual paths. And I grew up in a house where we had like, ancient, like, we had these Indian elders who kept ancient oral traditions come through our home. We had Tibetan Rinpoche staying in my home. And, and my mom was one of these people that just like, she brought so many people through our door, and I was exposed to so much as a young person. But the whole notion of devotion completely was, it was beyond me at that point.
It's not very American.
No, it wasn't American. But mind you, my father chanted mantras to me. So the first time that I met you was when Krishna Das came to Yoga on Main to sing. And I think that was in, I think it was in 2000. I think that's the first time he came to sing. And when he sang the Hare Krishna mantra, I left my body. I didn't know what I was experiencing, but all I knew was that like, this was intense. Like this put me in a space that I couldn't name, I couldn't word. It was familiar, but it was foreign, but it was home, but it was something. And I was just even more like latched on and kind of, addicted, so to speak, with whatever was going on in front of me. It just felt so right. Um, and then and then I started having dreams about Maharaji. And my dreams were very like my dreams held my skepticism and held how I would hide from him. And there was a lot of stuff about duality and sort of questioning. And I had a whole series of dreams with him in it. And it revolved around some of this painting, some of the dreams. And then finally, I had this one dream where I was following him through a house, and he would walk, and my eyes would get like as big as my head, and all I wanted to do was like stare at him, and I didn't want to blink. And I just remember like kind of staring at the back of his head, and then he would turn around to look at me, and I'd like quick kind of like look away, like do whatever, not paying attention over here. And this happened a couple of times. And then I was on the landing of the stairway in the dream, and I'm walking behind him, and he's got his blanket and everything. And he turns around, he looks at me, and he catches me staring at him. And I was like, oh. And he just looks at me, and just with absolute love, he says, "Why do you keep turning away from me?" And then that was it. And I came up out of the dream, and I was like, I have to give him something that is like, shows him how much I love him. Like, I have to, like, my heart just burst open in that moment. And so I came up out of sleep, and I thought, I'll give him a flower, and it'll be a symbol of my blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, you got to do better than that. That's just dumb. Forget that. So I went back to sleep, and I was like, I said, like, that's dumb. You can't do that. So I came up out of sleep again, and I thought, I'll buy him a gold pen set. I'll buy him something really expensive. And then I kind of fell back asleep, and I thought to myself, like, what is he going to need a gold pen set for? Why would you do that? So I came up out of sleep again, and I thought, I'll just give him all the love in my heart. And then I went back into this sleep, and it was just like gold glitter raining over black velvet. Like, that's what I just remember seeing. I was just in this deep, deep space. And from then on, it's always been about, it's just been about Maharaji for me. And that has kind of happened in tandem with my yoga. Like, so I taught yoga for a couple of years. And sort of when this dream happened, it was around the time that I met my yoga teacher, Diane Long, who I've been working with now for over 20 years. And so all of this kind of blossomed up around the same time. And then I just really was, I worked with Diane in a way where I would go and see her for several times a year. And I had no idea what this practice was about, and I didn't understand the asana practice and where she was coming from, and but I kept going, and I had that same feeling of like, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to keep following it. And as time has gone on, I don't see a difference between my devotional practice and my yoga practice anymore, in that what I have to bring, the attention, the quality of my attention that I bring to my asana practice, and what I am doing with my body, and how I'm doing it, and how I'm using it to refine my attention, it's like the same thing as being in a devotional practice, where you just want to bring the best of yourself. You want to bring all of your presence. Like, that when you were with Ma, like, you didn't want to sit there and think about what your shopping list was. You didn't care that you wouldn't even care if you were on fire, if it would have kept you like distracted from her, And it's kind of like, it's to me, it's sort of that same thing. So all of these different things that I've done with, a devotional practice and an asana practice and breathwork practice and all these different things, they all work to that same point for me. Like, I'm really one of these, like, all roads lead home. It's just how we use what we use, and everything is a tool. But yeah, that's kind of it kind of, that's my story. That's a long version of it. But yeah, I mean, it started when I was young, and the influence was there, and then it just awakened one day in me. And I was probably about the age that my father was when he got really into Ram Dass for a hot minute, so like there was something in that. So I have this weird sort of like, it was a family lineage, but not.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. You told stories in there that I didn't know. I don't think I'd heard from you.
Hmm.
And I have to just see, because I'm getting an echo on my end. Is anybody hearing that? Let me see.
I don't hear it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to leave it to Mark to fix if it's true. Let's talk about, I want to ask you more about Siddhima, but let's talk about that a little bit later, because we've been with Siddhima together many times now. And then thank you, Mark. Now I don't hear it. That's great. We're going to talk about loneliness and depression. We're going to talk about depression first. It's a big topic and they're interconnected, or they can be, certainly. So I want to just tell my story a little bit around. Yeah, there was an echo. I think it's fixed now. Thank you, Anja. People tell me if. Oh, hi, Janaki. There's lots of people here. This is so great. Okay, so my story. I'm looking at my notes because I want to remember kind of like the questions I want to ask. But I've had depression on and off. It comes and goes for me since I was a teenager, I want to say. And I didn't recognize it as such. I wasn't diagnosed until maybe a few years ago, formally, but it's something that was always with me. And certainly spiritual practice, when I first, came upon it, it felt pretty miraculous and uplifting. Like I really thought, like, this is it. I'm going to be happy forever. I'm done. I met Siddhima. I'm chanting. Like I was euphoric, right? And everybody knows that doesn't last. I hate to tell you, but that's just not the truth of life, right? So it's been with me over the years, and there are different things that help. So chanting helps, but it's not the only thing that helps, right? And when I'm depressed, I feel pretty disconnected, right? I see things differently. It's like my mind isn't, I feel like my mind isn't right. I don't know, like I know my thinking it's like wrong thinking. And it's nothing, but I've gotten better at, I used to really judge myself and like get really try to will it away or move it sort of with my willpower and strength. And I started to get into the common spiritual honeymoon. Exactly, it's the spiritual honeymoon. But anyway, so with depression, I would get like kind of hard with it. I would get where I would really be hard on myself, I think, about it, and I was going into fix it, like I have to fix it, and then I get hard and more anger comes up because that feels more powerful and stronger. And I started to sort of maybe in the last few years shift to where I just allow myself to be sad. Like I allow the sadness to come, and I think of it sometimes kind of like the way I think of it when I have a cold or a flu, like I'm not feeling well and I need to do the things that make me feel better, right? And so things that make me feel better that aren't spiritual practice. I'm getting the echo again. That's really weird. Should we turn off my echo cancellation, Mark? Or check it or something, and then we'll uncheck it later? Because I think I'm getting this echo again. Okay, we'll figure it out. I hope. So things that I do are like I found that physical activity, vigorous physical activity, is immensely helpful. So especially in the pandemic, it got much worse, which is the truth for so many people. The depression really came on more strongly and more often than it had in a long time. And I was doing a lot of chanting at home, and it was still like, whoa. So I found that like physical activity and walks, getting outside were really helpful. Nature can be really helpful, which I know it is for you too, Ganga. And that's Brooke's other name, Ganga. Some people know it. So let me just see if there's something. I guess I want you to talk about. I know you love gardening. You're a master gardener, and I know that's one of the things that you do to ground yourself. But can you sort of talk about how depression has affected you over the years? You know, what your practice has done for you, how your relationship to it has changed and evolved. And then, what have you done that's supported you outside your practice? Like, what can your practice do? What have other things done? Where have you sort of hit some hard places? And then I'm going to ask you, once you answer this, I want to follow up with a question about Siddhima.
Okay. So I was like you, like, I think that the first time I remember being depressed, I think it was like right after my 17th birthday. I don't know why. I just was miserable. Like, I remember I was in high school at the time, and I remember being at like a school. We were in the school auditorium one Monday morning, and I just remember thinking, like, I'm just miserable. And I went through the next 5 years of my life miserable. And I didn't know what to do about it. And we didn't talk about it. There was no, I don't know. It wasn't talked about within my family. I just didn't have a family that was like, oh, we'll go to a therapist or anything like that. I was just being a teenager, right? And I was really super broody, and it just worked. Being involved in the goth scene, like, being depressed and broody just was part of the look, right? So I got really good at, just functioning around it, I guess. And sort of, I had things that it just sort of fit. I didn't think of it as being outside of anything. And I remember when I was in college, somebody said once, well, if you've been depressed once, you'll be depressed again. And I remember thinking, like, why would you say that to me? That's terrible. And then eventually I got depressed again. It happened. And mine was so I feel that, like, my depression was brought on often. So I recognized it as there definitely being like, there was like the chemicals in my brain weren't right. Like, I couldn't find a way to be happy, but it was often brought on situationally. And I say all of this, like, first of all, like, I want to say, like, I don't know what to say about depression. Like, this is just my experience. I lived very closely with a friend for a number of years, and she would go to work, and as soon as she would get home from work, she would go to bed. And every day that she had off from work, she would stay in bed, and she wouldn't get out of bed. And I didn't understand it. We would be getting ready to go out, and she would start crying, and she couldn't stop crying, and we had to take her home before, and that was it. She wouldn't come out with us. So that was like a level of depression that I didn't experience. And I always thought that for a really long time, like, I didn't understand mental health issues. I just figure, like, you find a way to function. So I think I had that part of me that was very judgmental around my own issues. And I watched other people around me as a child and as a teenager growing up, and seeing people just really kind of miserable and unhappy, and being judgmental of them. So when it was my turn, and I feel like everybody has a turn. I feel like the Dalai Lama must have said this somewhere, like, everybody has a turn, and it's like, we all have a turn, and sometimes we have more turns than other people, and sometimes our turns are harder than other people's, but we all have a turn, right? So when it was my turn, it was so easy for me to judge myself, because here I was being the exact person that I never wanted to be, that I didn't understand, that I didn't have space for. And there was a point in my 30s where it was like there was a breakup that precipitated it. I had kind of like a series of some really intense breakups that really were rough rides for me. And then finally I had one that just sucked me into a hole. And there were days where I just couldn't, everything was dark. Like, I start feeling my vision darkening around the edges, and it was just, I couldn't get out of it. Like, if I could do laundry, maybe, it was those kind of days. So, and that went on for a long time. That was kind of the beginning of going through this phase where I looked at depression and loneliness, and I had to really look at it. I had to really sit with it, and it was just blisteringly uncomfortable, and there wasn't a thing that I could do about it. And at one point, Siddhi said to me, like, "What's happening to you is not your fault. This is karmic." And I don't know if she meant like the situation around the end of the relationship, or she meant my depression. But
Or both.
it could be both. Who knows? I don't know. Those words just really stand out in my head. And she, so when I was in my 30s, I had already been pretty anchored in different practices. So apart from the asana practice and the devotional practice, there's also the rebirthing breath work that I've been doing for 20 plus years as well. So that's an extensive community that really has been huge and supportive for me in my time. And I would just kind of throw everything at my depression. I think that there was a part of me that never really wanted, if I was honest, like I kind of enjoyed it. Like I kind of enjoyed being a little miserable because it kept people away from me a little bit. And I could manage. I didn't have to manage because I was at a point where I couldn't handle too much stimulation. Like I have a really sensitive nervous system. I get overwhelmed really easy. How the hell I went to India for so many years is totally beyond me. But
you hated it. We'll talk about that later.
It's a whole other thing. It was just hard because there was just so much for me to manage, and I just was like nervous inside all the time. So the depression, I had to learn. I don't think I ever thought of like tried to stop being depressed. I just know that people would say stuff to me like, why don't you get out of your house? Like, why don't you go to like a coffee shop or do some work? Or why don't you go to like a jazz club? And I was like, why would I go to a jazz club? Like, of all things, why would I do that? I don't know why that was a suggestion somebody made one time. And I was like, what the hell? So people would say stuff like why, and all I did, I basically sat at home and I was in my bathtub for years just because being in warm water was soothing to my nervous system, and it let me like kind of it gave me this little kind of womb like encasement, the depression. It kept me really close to myself. And so the way that I learned to deal with it was there were all these practices on the outside that I could do, but I had to spend a lot of time really. I would let there be a meditation in my mind and a thought of like, what does gentleness mean? And I'd walk around trying to understand what gentleness meant for months. And for a long time, I went through accepting things. Like, what does acceptance mean? What does it mean to really allow things to be there and not have to change them and not make them any different? And I remember people even saying to me, and one good friend who's had a lifetime of spiritual practice, she's several years old, decades older than I am. And she would say, if you can witness it, if you can see it, it will change it. And I just sat there and I could see it. And I hated every inch of it. And I hated every inch of me in it. And I couldn't change it. And I couldn't do anything about it. And I couldn't believe that just by witnessing it, it would change. But there is some kind of weird magic to it that we get taught about in these practices, that just the being with something, things evolve. And it's just, I think it's just hard to have faith, if you want to talk about devotion, and a practice of faith, not just in this other external physical image, but having faith in general that things will pass and things will change. And I've had people have to say to me, like, this too shall pass, like this, everything changes, like nothing is permanent, it will keep going. And we hear these things over and over again because they're true. But when you're in it, you just feel like it's the worst thing ever. And it's never going to change. And it's never going to be different. you know, so there, and so, and I could, you know, I don't have, like, I did everything. I did everything I could possibly think of doing. And then I still had to sit there and stew in myself and just be who I needed to be. And it included a lot of time, just like I said, being in the bathtub, being in bed, being at home, not going out. I worked. I was functional. I had a very functional life. I paid my bills. Would do a lot of massage work, and it was easy to see a client and be distracted and go away. I watched lots of television, you know, and there were points where I thought, this is, you know, this is just me. I was never diagnosed, right? But I did get to a point where I had enough suicidal adulation that I was like, not that I would kill myself, but if I did, this is how I would do it. Like, you know, I kind of knew that much. And then I started taking vitamin D tablets, and that took the suicidal adulation away. I was still miserable, but you know, and it just drug on for years. And there was, I couldn't change any circumstances. That I had to stop thinking about the circumstances that would spiral me into this place. And I often wanted to try and change things, and I couldn't change stuff, you know, so I just kept being with it. You know, I would walk in the beginning when it was really, when that vision was darkening around me. I would make sure that I would go out and walk at the point where the sun's the highest. It was in the winter, so it was like January. So I would walk anywhere between 12 and 2 in the afternoon and just walk for as long as I could. And I could see my vision change. It started to clear out, and there was a brightness. So I really feel like, so I did light, I did water, I did breathing practices, I did body practices. So we have, you know, the elements of, you know, earth, air, fire, water. And at this point in my 30s, I had already, you know, I'd already had a practice. I was doing chalices on a regular basis. So that's, you know, kind of the ether. So I get really like kind of elemental with things, and I like bringing all the elements and how they show up in different ways. And I did things like, I started gardening. I don't know why, never gardened before, didn't know how to grow anything, you know, had a few potted plants in my life, but that was it. And I got really into gardening, and you couldn't get me out of the dirt once I was in. And again, it was one of those things that was so intuitive. It wasn't a plan. Like, there was a community garden in my neighborhood that I passed on my walk all the time, and I was like, I'll go get in the garden. So I figured out who to contact, and the next thing I know, I was gardening, and I couldn't believe how much food I grew. You know, it was just like this kind of bumper crop, you know, of just everything. And so I just kind of follow my kind of my intuition. Like, someone says it, and I just kind of go and do it. I've done a lot of, and I did community work. I did a lot of community work too during those years, really getting to know my neighbors and getting to know people around me. Um, and it was at an intense time that Ma gave me a really strong practice to do. And but I did it. So and then eventually I reached a point where I had tried all the practices, and I tried all the things, but I really felt like I needed to do traditional talk therapy. I needed to find someone who understood that I had these other aspects of me that I went to for support and for healing. But I just felt like I needed to try something really traditional. And so I added that to the game too, you know, and people had asked about, you know, there were times where people in my life would say, oh, well, why don't you take some medication if you're so miserable? But I couldn't, that never felt right. For all the things I did for myself, that never felt right. And I feel like every time I've asked for medication, nobody's ever given it to me. So I assume that it's not for me to have. But yeah, I think that, I think of depression as being, it's a long road, it's a hard road, but it's a gift, because it allows you to be really close with yourself. I had to learn how to be really loving with myself, and really gentle, and really take care of myself in these little ways, you know. And I would often have to think, like, if I was my own child, how would I be if I came to myself to say, like, I feel sad. I just don't feel, or I didn't even know if I felt sad. I just didn't feel happy. I just felt so like, meh, so, there was that. And then the loneliness came in, like the loneliness was part of the depression. And the loneliness was the landscape that I traversed. Like I traversed this landscape being depressed. But the loneliness was this whole other thing that I had to learn about. Yeah. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah. Said
Okay.
so many beautiful things.
Okay.
And I still have this echo and it's really bothering me and I can't seem to get rid of it. I don't know what to do. So I'm just going to talk and hope that you can hear me well enough and that it decides to go away because I've done all the things I know.
Like dealing with depression.
Just going to get into acceptance. Yeah, that you said so many beautiful things, and I thought of a few things too. One of the things that spiritual practice did for me that I certainly didn't have in my younger days, which you kind of spoke to as well, was perspective. So when I was younger and I would become depressed, I had no perspective. It was just this, I was just in kind of the hell realm. And and the nature of, I think, despair and depression is that you don't think it will ever end. When you're in it, it feels like it's going to last forever. And it's similar to the delusion of like my spiritual honeymoon, where I was like, I'm blissful forever. It's never going to end. It's kind of the same, right? Sides. And, but with practice over the years, I started to see it as like, okay, oh, I had that ability to be the witness a little more and go, oh, you're depressed. You need, like I said, like you need care. You need to slow down. You need to simplify. You need to take things off your to-do list. You need to like get, do the like bake. Maybe, sometimes baking people is what does it for me. But it's like those, like you said, the elemental things, like sometimes you just need to walk on the beach. Sometimes, like whatever that is. So that's something that I feel like for me, spiritual practice really gave me that ability to name it, to have perspective. Even when I know my mind's not right, I can say, oh, my mind's not right. Whereas before I was just totally lost in it. So that's a big deal. I think that spiritual practice can do for us. And that's a big deal. But does it make it so that I'm not sad? No. Like I'm still sad until it lifts, and it usually takes a little while and it does lift. And I'm lucky also that I'm not a person I'm functional when I'm depressed. I can function. So I think, you spoke a little bit about loneliness, but I actually wanted you, and you talked a little bit about Sidima a little, but I'd like you to talk more about her guidance for you when things got really hard, because you've had some great, and you don't, obviously you tell as personal as you want or not, but my point is you've told me some really amazing stories about your time with her when you were in India and you were like, I felt like I was being burned alive, like where it was really hard. And it can be that way at the ashram with, as blissful as it could be with Siddhima, like when stuff would come up, hard stuff, I certainly found that when I was there in Kenchi, it was, magnified thousands of times. Like I was like, I really thought sometimes like, I'm not going to make it through this. Like, Maharaji's just going to have to come and kill me. Like, I don't know, like with some superpower, like, cause this is just ridiculous. So, and my self-loathing would be like way out of control. And then also in Kenchi, because you have that container and it's so intense, and you have when Ma was there in a body, you really like felt held. So as bad as it got, and even though you had these delusions of like, I'm not going to make it through, there was that part of you that knew you were safe and taken care of, and you could even go further and, be held. And it always got resolved. I always felt that it got resolved, with maybe the exception of one time, but that was much later, but that it always got resolved there. like some revelation, something would come up. So can you talk more about, just give us some stories or some tales from your times with Ma?
Do you remember the time that we were there? We went with Marcia and the kids, and I had that rash that came up all over my body.
Oh, wow. I'd forgotten that.
You remember that? Like all of a sudden, like, so I had only been in India for, I don't know, a couple of days. And like I said, I'm a nervous person. And I'm also a bit of a hypochondriac at times. And that's an understatement. And and so here I was in India for 2 days and just getting a little bit of equilibrium. And we were at the temple, and all of a sudden I started to get this rash up my chest, up my neck, up my face, down my body, and I'm covered in rash. And I have absolutely no idea what's causing it, and I don't know what to do about it. And I can't figure it out for the life of me. And in the end,
I mean, who doesn't want a rash?
I mean, fortunately, like, it didn't itch or anything. It was just like this heat that was coming up out of my body with these, like, and because being in Kenchi is like being in a small town, everybody was looking at me going, allergy, allergy, rash, rash, like everybody knew without me saying anything. I was just kind of like, just please, just leave me alone. Because coupled with this was this, and it was funny because I think you said something to me one night we were in the room, and it set me off. And I remember like storming out of the room and being so angry and just walking around the temple. And I was mad. I was so mad. And I was so mad. I was so mad. I was so mad. And all of a sudden I was like, I am mad. And that's why I have this rash. And the rash is the anger that's coming out of my body. And, it's kind of this moment. So there were these things that would happen at Kenchi that were just like, they were super magnified. And in the end, somebody gave me a homeopathic remedy, and then I somehow got mod, gave me hers or something. And then all of it went away, and it was fine. And it was the thing that happens. But I'm a little hesitant. I only hesitate to speak about what happened in India because I don't want people to have this idea that you only have these experiences in that place. Like, I feel that I have so much grace in my life, so much grace and so much good fortune. Not only was I ever able to like have a sense of who Maharaji was and that he became this living presence to me, but that, and it took me forever to even, like, I saw Siddhi Ma's name so many times. I remember going to Kirtan and, and Bubby would say to me like, oh, the girls are all in India with Ma, like, went over my head. I didn't hear a reference to Ma. And then it wasn't until sometime in 2005, maybe, that, Bub said to me one time, Ma's calling, I'm going to India. And I was like, I want to go to India and meet Ma. And that was the beginning. That was when I first met her. And so I went to India to see her. And so I feel like there was even more grace that allowed me to do that. I don't know why. And I remember talking to KK one time, and I was like, I feel fortunate. I feel so fortunate in my life, despite the ups and the downs and the darkness and the, the frustration and all these things. Like, I've always been able to anchor it that this is immensely good, immensely fortunate. And he just said, like, we just have these samskaras, you did something right somewhere at some point. And I was like, okay, I don't know how else like, I just got lucky. I don't know why we have it, and why it's shown up the way it has for us, and it shows up for people in other ways. Some people were with Maharaji and with Ma for long periods of time, and some people weren't. And some people have these connections that are completely, they have the sense of devotion that I can't even touch. I'm busy wondering, like, does my hair look okay? Like, and they're, wrapped in devotion, so it's like, I'm always dumbfounded by all of this. So so when I went to India, it was not my first time there, but it was my first time for Durga Puja. And it wasn't my first time with Siddhi Ma. It wasn't my first time in Kenchi, but like I said, for Durga Puja. And it was just hot on the tail end of this relationship ending, this one that really kind of broke me. And I went to Ma, and I even said, like, this is what's going on for me, and I don't know what to do. And she said to me, she said, don't worry about the relationship. And I didn't know what that meant. And she said, Kenchi is as much your home as it is anyone else's. And if you need me at any point, I don't care what time it is, day or night, come and get me. And that night, my brain broke open. And I don't know who's watching this, but I'm sure that somebody who was sharing that room with me that night and for that visit, who remembers how mad I went, is probably watching him to attest to it. I was so unhinged, and I didn't hide it. And I tried to get to Ma when I was really at my worst. I ripped all my India clothes off, and I was like, forget this India thing. I'm out of here. This is bullshit. Rah, rah, rah. Running down the mountainside. I want to go talk to Ma. But Prema wouldn't let me have access to Ma. That was, Prema caught me in the middle of it. And she said, you can't see Ma. She's not available right now. And I said, but she said, and for whatever reason. But I just had to keep remembering that Ma said Kenchi was as much my home as anyone else's. So that was sort of the beginning of it that really allowed me to begin to unwind this stuff. And I went insane. And I felt like I was being boiled in hot oil, and I wanted to commit not just murder, but torturous murder in front of Ma, and let everyone know that this was going to happen. And I was just beside myself with all the ugliness, right? And this is what happens when you go to this very spiritual place, and it's, everyone says, oh, it must be so peaceful there. And I'm like, you have no idea. It's awful sometimes. And the only way that I was able to stay there was because she was there in her body, and I was attached to that, and so, and I kept going. And so like, so I would keep going back. And so every year I would go back. That year was really hard. I made it through. It was fine. There are plenty of stories to tell about that visit with her. But and then the next year I went back, and I was still miserable. And there was a point where I was actually staying in a hotel next to the ashram. And I was really just spiraling into a hole. I didn't even realize that I was slipping into a hole. I was just laying there in bed, and it was just like sink, 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 sink. And then my phone rang, and Prema said, Ma's calling, you have to come. So I was like, oh, okay, Ma's calling, I'll go. So I got up, I got dressed, and she had me sit with her, and she had me stay in the room. And there was another Westerner there in the room with me, but it was mostly Indians that were coming in. And I was given the instruction to stay in the room. Ma was going to talk to these other Indian folks, but stay in the room with her and not to leave. So I stayed. And Jaya, who was translating for us at the time, she left the room, and then eventually she came back after about 20 minutes or so. She came back, and I just sat there with Ma. And that's when she said to me, like, this is what you do. And when you do your practice, this is how you do your practice. She told me, do your Hanuman Chalisas. And when you do your Hanuman Chalisas, this is how you do them. This is what you think about. This is what, and she had it like doing like this with me. This is what you do. And that's when she said, what's happening to you is karmic, and it's not your fault. And that was a moment where it really helped me kind of take myself off the hook, because I kept thinking, I did something wrong. I did something wrong. I caused this. I did something wrong. It was my fault. If I was a different person, I wouldn't have been here. If I was a different person, I would handle this differently, this better. And she just said, you do your practice. And, and I would always, and so like, during those years, so when I first met Siddhi, it was really like I had the typical experience that so many people talk about, like that feeling of coming home and you get overwhelmed with crying, and it's not grief crying, but you're just, it's your tears. And I would just cry in Ma's presence the whole first time that I was with her. But this was different. Like I kind of, when I came to her again, it's just, I was sad. I was grieving. I was sad. There was just this heartbreak in me. And I was just so deep inside of myself. And she used to tell me all the time, don't cry, it'll ruin your eyes. So I figured out how to cry. And everyone would make fun of me, because they were all like, you always wear mascara and put on your makeup when you're at the ashram. Like, it was like, but I realized that, like, I would do that stuff because, like, I didn't want to cry. I have to figure out how to cry like with makeup on my face. So I couldn't like ugly cry and really like let myself wallow in it and get into it, because otherwise I'd have makeup streaming down my face and everybody in the small town would see and know and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, I learned how to cry with mascara on and do it less, I guess. But yeah, that was sort of the first time. And right before, I think it was that visit. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look in my journals. I think it was that visit where before I left, she said, she gave me a prescription of practice to do. And she wanted me to do chalices every day. And she said, and you don't miss a day. And to make sure that I wouldn't miss a day, she made me make a vow to Hanuman. So I had to go to Hanuman Mandir and I had to promise Hanuman and make this vow to him. And she said, if you do this practice and then you come back and then you give him X number of ladus, he will give you, ask for the boon to be for your happiness. Hanuman will make you happy. And at this point, I was so hopeless. Like, how did I know that this was going to actually make a difference? But I did it because I was like, nothing else. Like, I'm doing everything else. So why don't I just do this too? I didn't do it with this sense of like, I'm going to get out of this, So I did this practice for a year. And I remember doing it and thinking like, I'm still fucking miserable. Like, this sucks. Like, I'm just miserable. I'm not happy. I don't feel happy. I'm angry. And I would feel all these other feelings, but I just kept kind of doing the practice and doing the thing. Another way that I would manage my anger around this is I used to yell at Maharaji a lot. Like a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, this is your fault. You made this happen. If you have the keys to my mind, and change my mind, like, and goddamn you. And I would just take it all out on him.
It's a great practice.
It is. It's a good practice because it keeps you from taking it out on other people, which is the one you don't want to take it out on other people. So I learned to take it out on him. And so she gave me this practice to do. I went through the practice for the year, and that year I traveled more than I had ever. I had so much going on. I was doing this community work at the time, and then I traveled through Australia and New Zealand, and I was in the back of a camper van with my mom and my brother, but I still did the practice. Like, it never stopped, and I would do the practice, and I would find myself when I would do this practice, like, all these things would come up, different emotions. I was tired, I was bored, I would laugh. Sometimes I just laugh through doing chalices. Who knows why? Something funny comes into my mind and it makes me laugh, and I just kind of go and do it. And so we went back to India that year. And one of the first things Ma said was, whatever you do, do it in front of Maharaji. Do everything in front of Maharaji. Let him see everything that you do. And when you do chalices, you do them no matter what. Do them if you're bored, do them if you're tired, do them if you're happy, do them if you're whatever. And I was like, all right, well, I seem to be doing something right, so I'll keep going. But I still wasn't happy. And so I went back to India, and I remember feeling really desperate. And I remember I wrote a letter to Ma because I didn't know how else it was one of those moments where she was just kind of inaccessible enough that I didn't quite know how to get her in that way. And I wrote her a letter, and I said, I've done everything you've asked me to do. And it's been over a year now. And I just feel like I'm surviving. I don't feel like I'm living. You always tell us to go and live a joyful life. And I don't feel like I'm living. I'm just surviving. And I left Kenchi and I didn't see her. And just as we were like a half an hour away from Kenchi, I get a message from Prema, and she said, Ma's calling. And I said, I got to go back to Delhi. I got to get my plane. Like, I can't, like, I've waited, and and it didn't even bother me. Like, I just knew, like, she knew, and that was enough, and years went on, and I still didn't feel happy. And it wasn't, I don't even know at what point, but it's only been, so I've been doing this dance for 10, 15 years, kind of on and off, miserable, greater and lesser extents. But I would say that somewhere in the past, maybe past 4 or 5 years, like, I've noticed, like, I'm happy. I actually am happy. I have these moments where I'm not just like, all right, come on, miserable self, let's go to work today. I would just take my miserable self to whatever I was doing just to include it, and so something has changed, and I definitely feel, I feel better and happier. And so but I felt like I just had to go through it, and I had to get through it, and I had to, um, do the things that I knew were helpful. Like, obviously, if I felt this miserable, like, I'm not a drinker. I don't do drugs, not for any reason. I just don't. Right. So, like, but had I done those, like, if I had self-destructive behaviors, like, I know those things would not have helped me. And this is where I think grace came into my life, that I had enough sense to be like, hey, you know what? I feel miserable and sad, but something that might help me is doing a breathwork weekend through the rebirthing community, or going to, like, I'm going to go make sure I spend time with my yoga teacher and study with her, because that practice keeps me in present time. Or I'm just going to sit down and do my chalices no matter what. Or I'm going to go and find a therapist and go talk it out. Or I'm going to figure out how to garden. Or I'm going to challenge myself in a new way. Right? It's like I just kept doing these things in the hopes that maybe something would shift it. I don't know what shifted it, but all I know is that eventually it stopped being my turn.
Mm.
And the thing that comes in with loneliness is that, like, I think it's hard being a woman in your 30s, wanting a relationship, not having a relationship, not finding someone that you feel like you can have a relationship with. And I think it's a little different in your 30s, because you still have that kind of juiciness of your youth that holds, you hold on to. You've got all your hormones making you crazy, and all that kind of stuff going on, just because you want to have sex all the time and no one talks about it, but it happens, especially if you don't have small kids to chase after. Right? So it's like it can just really confuse you, and you start to really judge yourself, like, I'm not meeting someone, I don't have someone in my life. And so there's this feeling of loneliness, and there's that judgment around the loneliness. And spiritual practice often tells us, like, well, the cure to loneliness is solitude. Right? Well, it is, but I think you have to be predispositioned to liking to be by yourself, which I happen to be. And it also takes a while, and it takes longer than we often have patience for. So I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, it's not, but not all of us have that predisposition. Not all of us have those lives that allow us to give it that much time and that much space. And it's okay. And what I did was, I was stubborn. I'm a willful, stubborn person, and I try and use it to my own benefit. And I was insistent upon I moved into this huge apartment by myself, and I thought, I'm going to fill this space up with me. And by the time I left that apartment, I occupied every corner of that apartment. And I was ready for another space that I could inhabit another way. And I just got used to being with myself. And I thought, being with myself was like being with Maharaji. I'm just letting Maharaji fill up the space. I'm going to let Siddhi Ma's presence be here with me. They're going to keep me company. I just used my imagination, and I just wasn't going to sit there and be like, I'm so lonely. I mean, I did that plenty of times. I did that a lot, but it never got me anywhere. It just got me to being a version of myself that I honestly didn't like. So I was like, all right, well, let's play in the world of the invisible a little bit and see what that brings to life.
You brought up so many things that one of the things I wanted to speak to that you brought up is you said in the beginning, you said I'm hesitant to talk about my time in India, my time with Ma, because I don't want people to feel like there was something that, like that's what it has to be, that they don't have access to. And I think that's a really good point. And the reason I wanted you to talk about it is because of what you just did, which is you were so honest about the ugly side of things, like the rage you felt, or the murderous thoughts, or whatever they are, like that dark side, and that you're willing to be so honest about what really comes up in our minds. Because again, I feel like sometimes what I've seen happen with spiritual practitioners and in our community and in the greater community is this, like, I don't have those thoughts, like people not wanting to admit them. Like, I'm not, because that's negativity. Like, that's too negative. And that's just bullshit. Like, that's like, yeah, of course we all have those thoughts, and it's how you work with them. It's how you relate to them. It's what you do that makes the difference. But it's not, you're not a bad person for having ugly thoughts. Like, we all have those, right? And we all have intense emotions that come up that, in parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, or that are embarrassing or unattractive, and I think it's really important to start to bring light there and say, like, yeah, this is true. Like, this is how I was feeling. And it doesn't give that doesn't give it power to acknowledge it, right? So you can still say, like you do, and I went tomorrow, and I did the practice, or and I yelled at Maharaji, or and I went back and did breath work, or all these things, right? So that's really why I wanted you to talk about it, because it's true that you don't have to have met Siddhima or Maharaji or been in India to have a really solid spiritual practice, right? And to
Well,
really connect.
I have people who are who are more kind of singularly focused in their practices than I am. Like, I really come from, I just sort of the things that I do, I bring the same attention to them. But you don't have to do everything. For some people, there is just this one thing. And it's like, sometimes I get jealous because I'm like, oh, look, you can get on FaceTime and you can chant to the ethers, and this can be your practice, and this can be your thing, and you can share it with people, and it can just be out there and accessible. Right. And it's like, and I don't have this one thing that I feel like has that ease of accessibility, but everything I've done has helped. And that, like, I think Sharon Salzberg was so great in the times that I've sat with her, because I feel like she brings that that understanding that, like, you're not doing anything wrong. Like, you start with where you are. Like, don't make it wrong. I've heard her say that so many times, and it's always a helpful reminder. And the I have to say that the rebirthing community here in Philadelphia has been enormous for me, because you just have to be with what is, and you breathe, you simply breathe, and things come up, and you are supported in your space of allowing them to stop being fragmented and finding wholeness. And it's like, and there's, and a lot of that was that was a community, and a lot of people in that community, all they did was breath work. That was their thing. And it's like, and they don't need to do these other layers of things. Like, I often tell people that, like, my whole thing about having, like, a guru and being on a devotional path, it just makes me a better person. Like, I would just be hateful towards people. That's all. Like, it's not special. It just makes me exist. I don't have enough kindness that I come by naturally, because I can be jealous, I can be petty, I can be vengeful, I can have all these thoughts in my head, but somehow having the guru helps me not actualize them. That way of being, like, it just gives me another outlet. Not everybody needs it. Not everybody needs to do everything that I do. I just happen to. And so, like, I do it that way. So it's like, there isn't, like, and in all these practices, there isn't, like, there's no wrong way to meet God. What's the story in the Ramayana? But it's like early in the story, and the guy who's out he gets stuck in the storm, and he's up in the tree, and he's fighting off, like, the wolves or whatever that are coming after him, and he's throwing nuts from the tree down below, and they start hitting the Shiva lingam. Is that how the story goes?
I don't remember that part.
And so then there's this point where Shiva appears to him and says, like, you made all these offerings to me, and he's like, what are you talking about, offerings? Like, I don't know if he, like, threw them, or he was shaking in the tree or something, but anyway, like, inadvertently, whatever, like, Shiva's like, oh, you made these offerings to me, and so it's like, we don't have to do things with this, like, of course we have to do things with much fullness and attention as we can, but sometimes we have to just allow ourselves to be human and messy. And that includes all of these darker places.
Right.
And it's like, it's like, I knew people even in like the whole like goth community when I was in nightclubs back in the day, like they were just happy people. They weren't depressed. They liked the whole outfit, but it's like they kind of stood out because they weren't willing to be like, could be broody and down and it was like they were into the aesthetic like the rest of us. And so I think that, to me, yoga, the whole yoga scene, it was like being in the club scene. There was an aesthetic, you had accessories, you had verbiage, you had, inappropriate sexual behavior with one another, excuses to have loose boundaries. It was all the same. I walked in and I was like, oh, I know this is a scene like everything else. And so there's no wrong way. There's no wrong way is what I'm trying to say, like with how you come about your practice. Because if you start making it wrong, then you're not going to do it. And not doing it is it's that part of ourselves that holds us back from this gift that exists inside of us. You don't have to do it well. You don't have to do it 100%. You just have to do it. And I was told like showing up matters more than anything else. The most potent moment of a practice it's when you show up for it. If you walk away from a practice for 6 months, for 30 years, it doesn't matter. The moment you return to it is when there's so much power to that. And we have to do the things not when we feel happy or blissful, because we don't often feel happy or blissful. We have to do it. It's like taking medicine. I can't tell you how many times I sat down and I did chalisas. I did chalisas at one point. I was so mad at Maharaji, I refused to do them in front of him. I would sit off to the side, but I wouldn't sit in front of him. I was like, I'll show you. Watch me now.
That's hysterical.
Like, but you have to do it. You have to show up for it. And each time you do it, it's this little deposit that you make. It's like to have a savings account, you have to start saving money. So you drop that penny into the bank every time you have a penny. And for a long time you think, I don't have anything, but you give it enough time and eventually you have a little something to live off of. And I feel like practice is the same way. You just keep doing the things, you make the deposit. And even if the practice is like, it is around just having self-awareness, that goes so far. Like we have to do these things to really, it's okay to love ourselves in the process of spiritual practice. It's not selfish. It's not self-indulgent. It's not about making me come first. But like, I mean, part of the reason I think I went through so much heartbreak and so much depression is because when I see it in other people, I didn't understand it before. And now I don't judge it. I just see it and I go, man, that sucks. God, I know that place. That is awful.
Compassion.
Like, yeah. I mean, I feel like, because I was, there's so many instances where I've had experiences in life and I just, that's where we relate, because when something hits home and it's personal, that's when we really are able to have that connection. And it's no longer, the personal becomes the impersonal. And that to me is the stuff that's so important. So you just show up and you do it and then you walk away from it and you don't think about it. I spent a lot of time thinking like, how am I good? Am I not good? Am I getting it right? Am I not getting it right? Am I doing it well? I should be doing it better. I should be like, I'm measuring and all this stuff. And we all go through it. And eventually I didn't have this moment where I'm going to stop judging myself. Watch me stop judging myself, or stop measuring. I just did. Eventually it's like, because I just said, like doing my practice, whatever the practice may be, and bringing my attention, my awareness, it became like brushing my teeth. I just brush my teeth. I don't want my teeth to fall out of my head. So I just brush my teeth. I don't sit there and go, look, I'm brushing my teeth. Look at me brush my teeth for a full 2 minutes. I'm brushing my teeth, right? I don't do that. I don't sit there and tell people what good food I ate in the course of a day. Nobody cares. And nobody cares how much practice you do. That's the other thing. So you just do it and then you get on with life. And what is in your practice infuses you. And one of the things that I really appreciated about what Nina was talking about when you interviewed her last time where she talked about like how difficult it is to be disciplined with a practice, but she would find a way to show up a little bit in some way. And that was so meaningful to me, because I've struggled so many times with like my discipline sucks and I should do more and it should be more, and and it's nice
There's always shoulds, yeah.
other people have those problems. I have plenty of those problems. I'm so terribly disciplined. I'd rather clean my house sometimes than do my practice.
Oh yeah.
Like I do manual labor instead of doing my practice sometimes. It's insane. This is all part of the struggle. It's just part of what is. And I think these are the things that in time we start to relate to the darker aspects of ourselves. Like my depression, I still have moments where I'm like, I'm not happy today, but I don't think about it. I don't have that awareness around it. I'm not like, oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I can't do this thing. It's just like, oh, I'm just having a day. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stay away from people. You don't want to talk to me today because I got nothing good to say. And then it'll pass.
Yeah. I want to, I love what you said about practice, and we have a lot of great comments about that here.
And what are people saying? I want to hear it.
Well, let me, I just want to, they're saying, anyway, people are relating, saying what a hard time they have. They judge themselves, and to just give it brief, because I want to make sure we get time for question and answer. And I still want to talk a little bit more about the loneliness piece, and just tease out a couple things. And I want to leave time for questions. But with the practice thing, I'm really happy you said that, because it's true. Like I feel like I was really given a gift that Ma gave me, this, daily like a real prescription of practice, like, and that's what I needed in order to be able to do it daily. And for me, it's the anchor, it's my raft. It's like what I always do, no matter how bad it gets or good it gets, I do it. And, I do it first thing in the morning, because that's what Ma told me to do. But honestly, there's no way I would do it if it weren't first thing in the morning. Like it would never, ever happen. Like once I start doing other stuff, that's it. It's gone. Mm-hmm. So, but for everybody it's different. But I also think like, I am so if there was like a camera on during my practice every day, first of all, it's super boring, but also, you'd be like, wow, this is the woman who we believe what she says. Like, like we think she knows what she's talking about. Like she's ridiculous. Like I'm pathetic when I'm doing my daily practice. Like, if I can show up at all, I sit my butt down, which is a big deal. And,
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Goldstein always talks about that. And Sharon talks about that, like that sort of like the importance of just sitting your butt down at your altar on your seat, to do your practice is like the biggest part, right? Just get your butt in the chair or on the seat. And that's a big deal. And then that gives, and then whatever happens there, whatever your offer, however pathetic the offering is that day. And most days, mine is pretty pathetic, but it's still what I offer, right? It's still my everydayness. And that everydayness is a big deal, because you come as you are. You have good days and bad days. You have days where you're more in it and you really mean it, and days when you're just like phoning it in. And it still takes you through. Like it's still sort of working on you, and you're working on it, and it keeps some thread there. So
you're showing up for yourself.
Right. You're showing up. It's a big deal. Which is a big deal.
Like when you sit down and you kind of do a practice where you sit in front of a puja or an altar or something, or, you sit down on the cushion, or you show up on the mat or whatever it is, like you're showing up for yourself. That's really all you're doing. And I actually had a moment around my yoga practice that I recognized that I wouldn't practice because it felt so good and I loved it. And I didn't feel like I was allowed to have something that felt good. And that was that was a program. It was just a really weird program that came from, it was another voice in my head that was not my own, that was like, oh, it's so self-indulgent. You're enjoying this. And I was like, what should I always like? Should I always do things I don't like? I mean, like the why? Like, I mean that leads me to a conversation about service. But like, we do things that we love and we enjoy. We bring the best of ourselves to the things that we enjoy. It becomes easy. It becomes freeing. Um, and practice, like you said, like I mean, I laugh. Like my yoga practice when my hair was longer, it was about how many different hairstyles I could have in the course of 45 minutes than necessarily how many back bends I was doing or something like that. Whatever, it just, yeah, the quality changes. I feel like the quality of practice, it's almost like it's like the tides of the sea. Like things just come in and out and they ride with it. You don't know what's going to come. You don't know if like sometimes there's going to be a lot of plastic, or sometimes there's going to be a lot of jellyfish, or sometimes there's going to be a lot of foam, or sometimes it's just going to be really calm, and sometimes it's going to be a raging storm. You just sit down and you do it. And the rest of it just kind of happens. And we're lucky if we connect to something, even just for a short moment. That's all we're
Yeah.
looking for. This little thing. We just got to show up for ourselves to do it. Because then we get to tolerate the rest of our annoyingness better. Things that we annoy ourselves about. We have more space for it.
I wanted to just like you talked about loneliness a little bit, and some people wrote some comments about it, and I just wanted to get into it maybe for 5 more minutes, and then while we're doing that, everyone do um do write your questions. Some of you have already, but if you could rewrite them so that I can, otherwise I have to scroll all the way through. So I'm going to ask you to rewrite questions now while we just talk a little bit more about loneliness for like 5 minutes, but if we can keep it to that. But I just I think one of the things I wanted to just talk about, and because you and I have talked about loneliness really honestly and candidly, and there's such a stigma around it. We're so ashamed of it, like, oh, because if you're successful and you're happening or you're popular or whatever, that you wouldn't be lonely, and that's just not true at all. And I can be certainly lonely in like a room full of people, and I can be lonely whether I'm in a relationship or not. It doesn't equate for me, that disconnection, that feeling of really separation, right? That so many of us experience. And some of us experience it because we don't have community, but some of us can have community and still experience it. And so it's I wanted to sort of talk about the stigma of it. Um, but I also remember I did this post and you wrote really a beautiful, like what you wrote was really quite beautiful. But it was a few years ago. I was going through a period of loneliness, and it was around the holidays, and I decided to write a post on Facebook about loneliness. And the idea of it was, again, to just sort of be like, hey everybody, if you're feeling lonely, you're not alone in it. You
Mhm.
got a lot of company in your loneliness. But I got like comments that I was really surprised by. Like, so many people wanted to like make me feel better, which was kind, but it wasn't really where I was coming from. And then other people really wanted to be like, well, or said things like, oh, well, if you're really connected to God and your guru, you never feel lonely. Like, there's no loneliness there. And I was like, that's just not helpful, because, that just makes me feel like, oh, well, clearly I'm not a good devotee, right?
Right. You're
You
doing something
know,
wrong.
I'm doing so, and I don't, that's not, the person didn't mean it that way, but I just think I just wanted to talk about this in this space because I feel like that happens a lot, where we're told like we're not doing it right, or if you're really aligned with God or your practice or your guru or whatever the thing is, that then this won't happen to you. You won't feel it. You'll see. And I just think that's not true. Like, I've known, like, KK would suffer from loneliness and depression, and he was one of the most unbelievably devoted souls I've ever met in my life. So I wanted to sort of talk about that piece of it a little, and then you talked a little bit about this, but we could tease it out a little more about you know, the difference between loneliness and being alone. And you said like the antidote is often, you know, to be alone, right? And that
Mhm.
for some of us, that like for you, it comes naturally. I love to be alone. You know, and sometimes that's where I find the most solace and I find the most connection is when I can have space from, you know, socializing. Um, but, you know, I think just talking about that difference between the being alone and the loneliness and sort of some of what you found in it that you didn't already talk about, like some of those pieces of like the stigma or the like, you know, what the different antidotes are for you, or how you've come to a place of not judging yourself again for it, or not feeling shame, or not feeling like you're doing it wrong or something. So just a little bit about that, and then I'll take a look at questions.
Well, I think that that there is a lot of stigma around loneliness. I remember, somebody saying to me one time in passing, like like, "Oh, are you lonely?" And they said it in just such a way that it landed in me, where I was like, "No, I'm not lonely. I'm okay. I'm fine."
I'm fine.
Yeah.
You're
um,
lonely. I'm not lonely.
exactly. um, and Yeah, I mean, there is this stigma. I think that for me, a lot of the whole notion of loneliness was very much tied in with relationship stuff. This feeling of like I needed to be in a relationship. I needed to. No, so I had
Mm.
like I was fortunate. Like I got married when I was really young, and I got divorced when I was really young. So like I was never. For some women, it's really hard to be unmarried because it means this thing, especially, and I think it's changing as generations move on. But there have like women kind of our generation that had a minute where they were like, I've never been married, and it like meant something. um and but then I was out of relationship for a long time, and I didn't have that, and people would say things to me like, why are you still single? Like, you're amazing, why are you still single? And I
Right.
would
You're
say
so
like,
beautiful.
yeah.
Brooke, you're so beautiful. Why are you single? I'm sorry, but like, you know,
Well, first of all, like, being beautiful really doesn't mean
no, I
anything.
know, but
It's like
like,
whatever. But
that's
when
what
people would
people
say
say. That's what people
like
believe.
exactly, but like, why are you still single? And I was like, you know what? That doesn't make me feel any better. That doesn't make me feel better. Then it makes me feel like, I'm doing something wrong and there's something wrong. So that's where there would be like this kind of stigma and shame. And then after a while, I don't know, like I just got used to being me and being with me. And I don't know if it was a function of age. Like when I turned 40, I felt like I was living in my skin fully for the first time ever in my life. And I know that other people have commented on this, that you come into
Mm.
something as you get older. Um, I love being in my 40s. I think about things I don't worry about that I worried about when I was in my 20s. Like they're so unimportant. I can't wait to think about the things that I worry about now. Like in my 70s, I'll look back and be like, can you believe that was a thing? you know? And so I think these stigmas just kind of get held in. They're also like kind of time of life in these certain ways. Um, and like I said, my thing was just I knew that there was a part of me that wasn't comfortable being alone. And and as I talk about this, I think it gets to be a little bit clearer for me that that was kind of the stigma. And I've had these moments where like I get so into, I'm such like a creature of inertia. Like I'm either going or I'm stopping or I'm busy. Like, I'm with people or I'm not with people. And I would do these things where I would be by myself for a long period of time, and then I would have the weekend where I would like, go out, we'd go to a concert and we'd go out of town and we'd stay at a hotel and we'd have all this fun. I was around people for like, 48 hours. Then I would come home and I would still feel myself kind of like jazzed up and like, yeah, where's that party? Keep it going. And then I realized I had to kind of collect myself back in, and it was okay home and okay to be in space, and just to be with this thing. And then oftentimes people come around me and then I get mad because I'm like, there are people in my space. Ew, leave me alone. So then I have to get used to like being out with people again. So like I don't know how to talk about the stigma of loneliness other than like it is a stigma, but it's going to be something that comes from you more than it comes from outside in the world. If you feel lonely, send me an email. Say, hey, I feel lonely. I'll say like, that's okay. I have felt so lonely so many times in my life too. You are not alone in your loneliness. And the other thing is that like, I've been in thinking about having this conversation with you, Ambika. Like, I've been reflecting a lot about what practice does for me. And like, practice became the friend that I came
Mm.
to meet, that I wanted to
Mm.
hang out with. Because I would go through these periods of time where I would do like tremendous amounts of practice. And I think even at one point, after Ma gave me this whole prescription of practice, I went to her and I was like, do I have to keep doing this? Like, it rearranged my life because I did my practice at night. So there was no more going out to a movie. Like, I couldn't go to a movie past 6 o'clock because I had to be home to do my practice, get ready to go to bed. Like, it was like 2 hours before I could go to bed. So to self-care and get enough sleep at night and be able to do a quality practice, I had to shut the party down of my life. Party, very minimal, in another way. And, so eventually, like, having that practice, it taught me something in that year that I'd never known before, doing a practice so dedicated every day and having to do it, making sure I did it. And it rearranged something for me. But then I went to Ma and I was like, I'm tired. Like, I can't keep doing this. And she said, well, do what you can, And then I went to her the next year and I said, I feel like I don't love Maharaji enough and I don't do enough practice. And that, somehow my life would be better if I did more of it. And she's like, don't worry about it. Just do what you can, you know. And so, and there was even a time where I went to her because I was so because when I met Ma, I was so kind of in the bosom of satsang. We were all together. There was this period of time where we were just all together. We would spend weekends at events together. We were, I felt like we were traveling together. We spent so much time together. And then something shifted, and for me, it was the context of this breakup. And I thought suddenly, like, I had to be away from things because I was in just so much pain being around people and being reminded that I isolated myself. But what I didn't realize was that was starting to happen individually with everyone in our kind of satsang. Our connection became a little thinner. That's all. Right. And, and there was a point where my practice, like, I didn't have satsang. I didn't have people around me to share with. I didn't have the internet to share with people. So I just had to do the practice. And my thing about going to see Siddhima was that I wanted to figure out how to connect with her, because at one point she was going to leave her body. I knew that. And so this was all about preparation for when she left her body. I wanted to be able to maintain that connection after she left her body. So having to do practice and to be by myself and to search that place inside of myself as I'm doing it, to like, oh, how does it feel connected? Sometimes it feels connected. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I would feel her there with me. Sometimes I didn't. But it was just sort of like, it's like I was just searching the cosmos for the signal, right? And I had to do it alone. Mm. And there was something about doing that alone that was so enriching and it was strengthening. And when we go through these places where we feel like I'm so by myself, like, hi, I'm here on the other side and I can tell you it's a good thing. Just keep going. Don't stop walking. It's like the only way out is through, but at the same time with depression, if you want to stop feeling miserable, stop digging. Right? If you really, if you're in a hole, stop digging. It's the only way you're going to get out of it. Right? But you have to persevere through something to get to the other side. Yeah. And know that all those things that come in, that's just a product of our mind. That's the programming. That's what's there. And somehow we have survived it up until this point, and we have to continue to survive it internally. And we have to find ways to support ourselves to help it change. So I've shared with you a lot of the things that I have done, but there is the loneliness for me transformed into this place where it was like, I just like being by myself. I don't have to ask anybody what you want to watch on television. What do you want to eat for dinner? Are you even hungry? I don't have to listen to somebody else breathe. And don't get me wrong. I do like people and I like having people and I like having relationships and I like being with people. But there's something that is just so nurturing. It's like, honestly, it's just me and my cats and I'm good. But it took a while to get there. But I was, like I said, I'm stubborn and I'm willful. And I was going to make sure that I was going to get to that place. I
Yeah.
don't really know what else to say about it. It's like,
No, that's
like
good.
it sucks to feel this way, but you know, it changes. Everything changes. I'm going to feel lonely
Yeah.
again someday. I'm
That's
going to
the
feel
truth. Yeah.
stressed again someday.
Yeah. We're always changing.
And hopefully it won't be as intense as it was. Hopefully it'll pass a little bit faster. I won't fall down the hole quite so far.
Right. So I want to just answer some questions because we're close to time here.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple people asked me, and then I want to get to this other a couple other questions. But a couple people asked, Kamania and Jeanette both asked sort of about my comment about magical thinking. And Kamania, I think I remember what you said. You asked about what do I mean by fake mysticism coming from the spiritual community. So I want to just address that, and that when I say that, I'm talking about people. There are teachers and influencers out there just giving wrong information and talking about, like that kind of saying of like, oh well, if the universe wants me, or this is the universe telling me what I should do, or this is the universe coming to me and giving me this blah 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 blah. And that's just not that. I think that's, I'm sorry if that's your thing, but I don't agree with that. I don't think the universe is, I don't anthropomorphize the universe in that way. And I can't agree with that. And I think that's just like, that's like misguided, right? And I think that that really the truth is, and that the difference is, like, I think Jeanette asked about sort of the difference when like Siddhima talks about the Chalisa and saying it can, it has the power to make the impossible possible. And one could say like, that's magical thinking. Like how could that be true? And I think the thing is that when it comes for me from Siddhima, like there are teachers who I put a lot of faith in, and she's one of them. She really saw things. But I also want to say she did not have a stake in the game. And what I mean by that is, and Brooke is like nodding, right? Because she was not in this for herself to gain anything from us. She was not trying to get accolades from us or attention from us. And I think one of the things, she really was always thinking about others every second of the day, about others, about Maharaji, like really just an incredible example of what it means to be of service, right? She was an incredible example of love and service, constant. And so that's a very different place to be coming from than if you're trying to get followers on Instagram, or you're trying to sell your book, or you're trying to, get people to like you, or whatever you're trying to get. That's a very different space to be in. And so that's what I mean when I say, like, just there are people out there sort of peddling their wares that it's not true. And they're saying things that sound kind of like they could be true. They sound like maybe that's right. And so it's easy to get misled, but it's not right. And so it's a big difference from where it comes from, your trusted source. And, really grounding in like, is this really of service to others? Does this really feel like it's of service to all beings? Right?
Well,
Like that's sort of where I come from.
a good example is, so like I was, and some people know this, like, so I was really sick with COVID for this time last year, right? Like, or, I got it early in March, and I would read all these. So I'm home sick in bed, and I'm reading things on Facebook, and they're saying things like, you just have to keep your immune system strong, and you have to do this. And it's kind of like saying like, I did something wrong, and that's why I got COVID. And the fact is, like, I had just spent a month in Mexico in the sun. I had lots of vitamin D. I had eaten well. I was rested, rejuvenated, all this stuff. I went to the DMV. Some dude rolled up behind me, coughed his head off. I was there for 2.5 hours. This guy's coughing behind me. And this was when they're saying, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Right. So it's like, to me, it's like magical thinking also puts people in a position where it makes them feel like what they do is wrong. And Ma didn't say things that would necessarily make me feel wrong. I would feel corrected for sure, because I understood. I would have this moment where I was like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like, oh, right, of course. Like she changed the focus on the lens a little bit so I could see a little bit clearer. But there wasn't anything. She wasn't invested. I could go off and be like, I'm going to do whatever I want. She'll be like, all right, I still love you, but you're going to go do what you do. She didn't care. You know,
Right.
that's not what it's about. But magical thinking really is this place that it's not, like you said, like, know your source. You know, it's not grounded in anything that's necessarily real. And I think you should always test things out, because even my
Always.
devotion with Maharaji was tested.
Always.
There were times where I was like, what am I doing with this dude? This could be a bad idea. I could be really foolish. This could be silly. I questioned it. I questioned it multiple times. I questioned it a lot.
Me
And
too.
you have to
Yeah.
put everything to the test. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. It has to work for you. And you have to take that which works for you, and leave the rest and be okay. But you can't do it and think, and if you're hurting other people in the process, and just think like, kind of devil may care, like, that's not testing the waters. That's not testing things out.
John Farrell made a comment that I love. It's like covert spiritual shaming. Totally. There's so much of that. And and what you're saying, Brooke, is like my quote from the Buddha, which I always say, which is the Buddha always said, "Don't believe me, check it out for yourself,"
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
a direct quote. But like that was the message. Like, and I
Right.
and I'm glad you brought that up, because discernment's a big deal, and I think that like really checking it out and going, does this really
Yeah.
seem right to me? Like, really, is this
Mhm.
correct?
Mhm.
And then I did want to just a couple more questions. Um, this one is from Will. How do you maintain your relationship with Ma and keep her in your heart now that she has left her body? I miss having darshan, and I find myself longing for that connection. And Brooke, you talked a little bit about that, but I will say that I'm with you, Will, and I miss her very much every day. And I miss her in the body and being able to run to her with all my problems and say them. Although I do it still. Like, I want to say, I'm at my puja every morning with my pathetic offering, saying, "Here are my problems. You fix them. I don't know how to do this. You do it." So there's that. But I think, you know, she did for me. She helped me by saying, sing to Maharaji, chant the name. Like, she gave me some specific things to do that I still do. And when I'm chanting, just for everybody who doesn't know me, I'm always singing to Siddhi Ma. Like, that's always who's coming to me. That's always who I'm calling. I am always calling out to her when I'm chanting, because I want her to be with me, and I want to be with her, and I want to feel her. So, like, I have a lot of my prayers are, I just want to feel Ma. So do you want to say a little more, Brooke?
Well, I can say that when Ma was in the body, she was in a place, right? And I had to go to that place to be with her, which was India, which was never an easy experience for me. Um, but when Ma left the body, I felt like there was no place she wasn't. That was my personal experience. I miss her in the
That's
body.
beautiful.
When I've gone to see like Amma and stuff like that, I remember I sit there and I'm like, I just miss having Ma in the body. I miss that feeling of like being able to
Yeah.
go to her feet. Like, there is something about that that's just, it's precious. But because I knew that she was going, barring something awful happening to me, something tragic, like, she was going to leave the body before me. So I was very insistent that I was going to figure this out before she left. And so when she left the body, it was just
Always
like,
prepared, Brooke.
I'm a prepper. What can I say? But there's no place she's not now. She's been released, so I feel like she's everywhere. So it's it's like, I look at her picture. It's like Maharaji said, like, if you look at a picture of me, you're looking at me. If you're talking to a picture of me, you're talking to me.
Yeah.
That could be magical thinking, but who does it harm, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do it, and there is this kind of sense of imagination and playfulness, and this
Yeah.
childlike thing of like, I
Yeah.
have this imaginary friend maybe. But there are certain times where I'm doing my practice and it feels like I'm sitting with her, and it feels like she's with me, and I'm back in that ocean of sensation that is her.
Mm. Oh, I love that. And I wanted to just answer this one other question, and then we kind of have to close. And I want to make sure because Brooke offered to for anybody to email her, so I want to like show where you can connect with how you can connect with Brooke. Um, but Max asked, when you talk about loneliness, do you equate it to relationships or connection? And my answer is, I mean, it's kind of both and, but for me, it's almost always about connection. And I can be in a relationship and be pretty lonely, or not, and not in a relationship and not be lonely. And it's, for me, it's always about that feeling of connection to the source, which for me is Siddhi, but it's that bigger, not her in a body really. It's that the great mother, the divine mother. It's that source of that we all have within. And when I can connect to that, no matter what's going on, whether people like me or not, I don't feel lonely. But that takes a lot. And I can't do that every day, all day, right? I come and go with that ability to connect in that way. And there are days, and certainly when I'm depressed, my ability to connect can be really like, it takes a lot, right? So, but there is also that relationship thing and that judgment around, if you're not in a relationship, there's a lot of judgment, like what's wrong with me, like Brooke was talking about. And that what I must be flawed. There must be, I'm unlovable, or I'm this, or I'm that, right? You can name many things that you might be, and that can contribute to that feeling of isolation, of separateness, right? Sometimes that judgment alone. So that's my answer, Brooke.
Yeah, I mean, loneliness to me came up in the context of relationship. I don't think I ever had a sense of it otherwise, because I don't know that I ever had the sense of being connected to God. So let's start there. Like, so it's me hanging out with me, and I have these moments that I've had those moments where I feel that connection, that intense connection. Um, I don't quite know what to say to that, because I don't think I look at it in those ways. Like, I don't believe that like, I don't know what being connected to God is. So as far as I'm concerned, I can be connected all the time, but I don't know, like, I don't know the difference. So I can just make it up. And sometimes I feel like it just has to be made up, because there's no rule book for any of this. There's no guide. Like, there isn't a manual that says this is how you do, like, this is how you do it. This is what the experience is. You don't plug this into, A to B and then, take it over to Z and then you're there. You know, I just trust that it's there somehow. I think faith, we haven't talked a lot about, and just to have faith that, like, when my grandmother died, I was with her in the room, and it was a profound experience for me, because we were in this tiny little room, and the room filled. It filled. And it's like the room, there weren't more people in the room, but every angel and guide was with her. I could just feel it. I couldn't see it, but I could see it, but I could feel it. And it's like she wasn't alone dying. We thought she was leaving her body, but she wasn't alone.
That's
And so
beautiful.
whatever that experience was that allowed me to tap into that, I think of the same thing with, like, with Maharaji and Ma. It's the same thing. Like, they're there. They've always been there. Look, like, Maharaji came through my father. Like, he was singing mantra to me. Right? Like, how could it not? It was put in me as a vibration, a sound vibration, as a small human being. So how could it not be carried with me? It was in my cells. My father will tease me sometimes and sings Rama, Rama, Rama. And I'm just like, I feel this whole other thing go on.
Yeah.
And so it's like, some of this is, I think there is something about faith and devotion that is a little bit of magical thinking in a certain way, but it's more imaginary. And it doesn't mean that it's not real. It's just that, like, we're in the physical realm and they're in the invisible realm, and we have to figure out where we meet with one another. There is a place, but we just have to search for it. And that's where the place of practice allows us to kind of slip under our skin and through our skin, and things come up in another way.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to end. So I want to just, Mark, will you, because we only have a minute, well, I mean, we'll be over by a couple minutes, but Mark, will you just put up the banner for Brooke so people know how to get in touch with her website? And then also, so that's brookewelshyoga.com. And then also, we usually ask for donations. I've been forgetting lately to not to us, but to a cause. And India has really been on my mind and in my heart and in my breaking heart, because they're being hit so hard. And so Baba's Feed Project is a nice way to donate to a small, small organization feeding people
And a little
in
goes a long
Maharaji's
way.
name. And a little goes a long way in
Yeah, it
India.
really
So
does.
if Mark put that in the chat, and then Mark, you can switch the banner to if people want to know how to connect with me or buy my music or hear it, you can go to ambikachant.com, or you can go to my Bandcamp page, which is there, ambika1.bandcamp.com. So and he'll put those things in the chat, Mark. And so, we won't, since we're running late, we won't really do a proper closing kirtan. We'll just do an om. We'll just do a couple ohms. I'll just take myself off the but before we om, I do just want to say thank you, Brooke, for joining me. This, like, as always, feels like we could keep going for a good long time. There's a lot more, like everything we say uncovers another thing. Like, oh yeah, we didn't talk about faith. Like so many things. But so to be continued. But thank you for joining me. It's so really lovely to share this space with you, and I think a lot of people are really grateful, and I certainly am.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me, and being willing to bring some light to this so people can witness it and see it and move on. So thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Ram Ram.
Ram Ram. So we'll just om together, people, okay? Do a few ohms and say goodnight. And thank you to everyone. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May all beings be healthy and strong. May all beings be safe and protected. May all beings live with ease. Shri 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 Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji Ki Jai. Shri 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 Siddhi Mata Ji Ki Jai. Shri 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 Bajrangbali Hanuman Ki Jai. Shri 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 Devi Maya Ki Jai. Shri 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 Maha Maharaj Ki Jai. Thank you all, and thank you so much. And next month I am going to be talking to Shruti. So Shruti Asher Colbert. So that should be pretty fabulous. So I haven't posted that yet or posted the description, but I'll do that soon, I promise. Thank you. And thanks, Kamania. You stayed with us. Ram Ram, everybody. Night.